Your Honor, the state would call Dr. Claire Rose.
Please place your
sorry.
Please place your left hand on the Bible. Raise your right hand. Do solemnly swear or affirm to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God.
I do.
Thank you. Please state your name for the record.
My name is Claire Rose, C-L-A-R-E, C-L-A-R-E, and the last name spelled R-O-S-E.
Dr. Rose, good morning.
Morning.
Can I actually just scoot up just a little
Oh,
bit?
I'm sorry.
You pull the microphone a little bit closer just so the jury can hear you. Thank you. Dr. Rose, could you tell the jury where you're employed and what you do for them
Sure.
currently?
So I'm currently employed at the Greenville County Medical Examiner's Office, and I'm one of the medical examiners there.
Okay. And what kinds of things are part of your duties as a medical examiner with the Sheriff's Office?
As a medical examiner, I perform autopsies on deceased individuals to determine the cause and manner of death.
Could you talk a little bit about your education and background that led you into taking this role?
Sure. So I did my undergrad at the George Washington University, where I received a degree in biological sciences. Following that, I did a 4 years of medical school at the Medical University of the Americas. Following medical school, I did 4 years of residency training in anatomic and clinical pathology at the University of Knoxville, the University of Tennessee Medical Center in Knoxville, Tennessee. Following residency, I did 1 year of fellowship training in forensic pathology at the Milwaukee County Medical Examiner's Office in Milwaukee, Wisconsin.
And how long have you been a medical examiner for the Sheriff's Office?
I started working here in August of 2021, so about 4 years now.
Okay. So you were in that role in October of 2021?
Yes.
And to get in that role in October of 2021, you spoke to your education, but did you undergo specialized training specifically for the purpose of conducting autopsies?
Yes, so after I completed my residency training, I took a qualifying examination and became board certified in anatomic pathology. Then after I finished my fellowship training, I took another qualifying examination and became board certified in forensic pathology.
And approximately how many autopsies have you conducted since starting your role with the Sheriff's Office?
I have done approximately 1,500 autopsies.
Your Honor, at this time, the state would move to qualify Dr. Rose as an expert in forensic pathology.
No objection.
All right, without objection. He is qualified as an expert. Ladies and gentlemen, a person, as I've said with other experts, normally a person cannot give opinion testimony, and when a person testifies, they must testify as to what they either saw or they heard or they sensed by smell. However, there is an exception when someone is qualified because of education or experience, and they are permitted to give their opinion in certain areas if the court qualifies them this way, and this witness will be qualified in the area of forensic pathology to give an opinion, testimony in this area. However, that does not mean that you must accept the opinion, but it is evidence for you to use in any way you see fit and give it the weight and credibility that you believe is appropriate. Continue.
Thank you, Your Honor. So, Dr. Rose, could you go through with the jury generally what your process is when you're conducting an autopsy from the start of your analysis to going through the steps that you take?
Sure. So first off, an autopsy is a specialized procedure that we perform on deceased individuals, again, to determine the cause and manner of death. And an autopsy consists basically of two parts, an external examination and an internal examination. So first we start with the external examination, which consists of examining the body as is presented to us. So as I'm examining the whole body, I'm taking notes through note-taking and photographs and documenting any clothing that's on the body, any personal effects on the body, any medical intervention that may be on the body, just the general characteristics of the individual, such as their hair color, their eye color, their weight, etc. And then also I'm also looking for any signs of disease or injury. So once that initial examination is complete, then I will remove all that clothing, all the personal effects, all the medical examination. I will clean the body, and then I will re-examine the body again, the full body, looking again for any signs of disease or injury. So that's the external examination. So once that is complete, I move on to the internal examination. And that means opening up the body, taking out all of the organs, and then looking at each organ individually, again, looking for any signs of disease or injury.
And were you tasked with conducting the autopsy on Christina Parcel for this case?
Yes, I was.
And in going through the steps that you just went through, in the external and internal examination, are you documenting your findings as you're going through each of those?
Yes, I'm documenting what findings through notes and photographs.
Do you assign each case a unique number to know what you're referencing?
Yes, I do.
For hindsight?
Mm-hmm.
So, also in conducting your autopsy, do you put together a diagram or a picture representation of your findings of injuries?
Yes, I do.
Okay. Speaking generally as to your external examination of Ms. Parcel, well, let's back up before that. Before you begin your autopsy, are you apprised of general circumstances and the nature of how an individual was found and brought to you before you conduct your autopsy to give you some directive of where to go from there?
Yes, so in this particular case, when I arrived to work, I was made aware of Ms. Parcel.
I would object as a hearsay if she's going to talk about a statement that someone else told her.
I can rephrase, Your Honor.
Yeah. Sustain the objection.
Just generally,
Yes,
you're
I'm-
apprised of those
Yes,
circumstances?
I am.
So, speaking to your external examination of Ms. Parcel, what jumped out at you as you were going through there to mark of significance in your report and in your findings?
So I found that there were 35 sharp force injuries to Ms. Parcel.
Okay. Did you reflect those in your diagram that you put together for purposes of recording what you found?
Yes, I did.
I'm going to show you what's marked as State's Exhibit 192. I'm going to show you States 192.
Yes.
Is that the diagram that you put together?
Yes, this is the diagram I created.
Okay. Your Honor, this time the state moves into evidence, States 192.
No objection.
Objection number 192 comes part of the record.
Dr. Rose, speaking to how you received the body before you start conducting your autopsy, are there protections put in place to preserve what might potentially be collected as evidence at the time of the autopsy and maybe even down the road?
Sure. So the body is placed in a body bag and sealed, preventing from anyone getting into the bag. Also, handbags are also placed around both of the hands to preserve any evidence that may be present.
Okay. But otherwise, the body is brought to you as is from the time it's found?
Yes.
That's important to preserve for any findings that you may make or anyone afterwards. Is that
Yes.
right? And while you're conducting this autopsy, is there a forensic technician with the sheriff's office with you to collect evidence for purposes of the case?
Yes, there was one forensic technician present during the autopsy of Ms. Parcel.
Okay. I want to go through with you some findings that you made on State's Exhibit 192 as it related to Ms. Parcel. I'm going to start. This first page here. Starting with the top. You identified Ms. Parcel on this document?
Yes.
And then you make a note there. Could you explain to the jury what the difference is between a stab wound and an incised wound?
Sure. So first I'll just say what a sharp force injury is. So a sharp force injury is an injury caused by a pointed or sharp-edged object. Examples of this include a knife, which is the most common object that we see during our work, but it also may include other objects such as scissors, a fork, screwdriver, basically anything that has a sharp or pointed edge. So then sharp force injuries, if it's a knife, then we have either a stab wound or an incised wound. And now a stab wound is a wound that is deeper than than its length on the skin, and an incised wound is a wound that is its length is longer on the skin than it is deeper. And then so here in this diagram, the shaded oval areas indicate the stab wounds, and the partially shaded areas indicate the incised wounds.
So would it be fair to say, when you say stab wound, that's what most people, when they commonplace think of the word stab, is a stab wound. And an incised wound is more of, say, a slice?
Yes.
And approximately how many sharp force wounds were located on Ms. Parcel's body as it relates to her torso and her arms? So
to her torso and her arms, there were a total of 9 sharp force injuries, and I can quickly just go through
Sure.
each of them. So starting with the stab wounds, Ms. Parcel had 1 stab wound to the top of her shoulder and 1 stab wound to the left side of her upper chest. Both of these wounds went through the skin and penetrated the underlining soft tissue. Then you have another stab wound to the left breast. This wound went through the skin, the underlining soft tissue, and penetrated the chest cavity and superficially penetrated the left lung. Then we have the 4th stab wound, which is to the left side of the mid-back. This wound went through the skin, the underlining soft tissue, and just penetrated the chest cavity without injuring the left lung. So those are all the stab wounds, and then we have, well, on this one you can't see all of the incised wounds, but you have 4 inside. Yeah, here we go. So here you see 5 incised wounds. So you have 2 incised wounds to the right upper arm, 1 incised wound to the posterior right forearm, 1 incised wound to the left upper arm, and then 1 incised wound to the posterior left pinky.
I'm going to show you the second page here. Dr. Rose, as to Ms. Parcel's head and neck, how many sharp force injuries were identified in those areas?
So Ms. Parcel had a total of 26 sharp force injuries. So she had 7 stab wounds and 19 incised wounds. And I can quickly go through all of those too if you would like. Starting with the incised wounds, so she had, as I said, a total of 19 incised wounds to various locations to her scalp, to the right ear, the areas in front of the ear, the areas behind the ear, both cheeks, and to the right side of the anterior neck. And again, these wounds just went through the skin and superficially penetrated the underlining soft tissue. Now we have 7 stab wounds to the neck area. We have 1 stab wound to the left side of the posterior neck, and that wound just went through the skin and the deep underlining soft tissue. And then we have a total of 6 stab wounds to the right side of the neck. And these wounds went through the skin, the underlining soft tissue and musculature of the neck, and then perforated 2 major blood vessels that supply blood to and from the head, the right internal carotid artery and the right internal jugular vein.
As to the injuries that affected the carotid and jugular arteries, could those be fatal once serrated?
Yes, those would have caused significant amount of bleeding.
In your findings specific to these areas, and the locations of the wounds, are there more wounds on the left or the right side of Ms. Parcel's head and neck?
Majority of the wounds are concentrated to her right side.
And speaking to how the location of these wounds and the number in significant areas, pointing you to the stab wounds on the right side of Ms. Parcel's neck here, what would you say was, and when you're determining the cause and the manner of Ms. Parcel's death, which wounds brought the most attention to you? Which were the most significant in your analysis of making that determination?
The most significant stab wounds were the ones to the right side of the neck. The group of 6, well, 5 and then 1 you can't see, but it's on the kind of, if you move the sheet a little bit down, you will see 1 stab wounds to the right side. So the group of those 6, the 6 stab wounds are the most significant ones.
Dr. Rose, could you explain to the jury what blunt force trauma is?
So blunt force trauma is just injury to the body that's caused from the body impacting an object or the body impacting an object.
Did you observe findings of blunt force trauma as it relates to Ms. Parcel?
Yes, I did.
What were your significant findings there?
So Ms. Parcel had contusions or bruises to the left side of her face, her anterior neck, and 1 contusion to her left knee. She also had tiny abrasions or scrapes to her right cheek, her neck, and her left upper extremity. She also had 2 small lacerations or tears in the skin to the right side of her forehead and to her left eyebrow. Additionally, she also had hemorrhage within her scalp and hemorrhage within the left temporalis muscle, which is just a muscle that sits just underneath the left side of the scalp.
So, speaking to the findings of sharp force injuries with relation to Ms. Parcel, are you able to make any substantial findings as to the type of object used or specifics related to that object?
So the appearance of all of the sharp force injuries are consistent with a knife being used.
Okay. But past that, how specific can you get into making conclusions as to details of the knife, I suppose?
So just on the appearance of Ms. Parcel's wounds, I can't further characterize the type of knife.
And in conducting your autopsy, you didn't find any evidence that would aid you in further making a conclusion towards that effect?
No.
Is toxicology part of the autopsy process?
Yes, it is.
What is toxicology for the juries?
So during the autopsy procedure, I may take samples. For example, I may take blood to run toxicology just to see if there's any drugs in her system that may have contributed to the individual's death.
Were there any were any findings on the end of toxicology significant in your determination of finding cause and manner of death?
No.
Were there any findings as related to illicit drugs in Ms. Parcel's system?
No.
finally, Dr. Rose, what was your conclusion as to the cause and manner of Ms. Parcel's death?
So the cause of death was multiple sharp force injuries, and the manner of death was homicide.
Dr. Rose, just bringing your attention back quickly to the object that might have been used to cause these sharp force injuries. Did you make any findings as it related to what happened in the process of these injuries being inflicted as it relates to that object? The tip being broke off, or remains of the knife found in her system, or differences in the wounds to that effect?
Can you repeat the question?
So, in trying to make a finding or looking for findings as it relates to the object that may have been used in inflicting these wounds, were you able to find any evidence of differences in the wounds, that a different object might have been used, or something happened to the object in the course of inflicting these injuries?
So at the time of the autopsy, I did not find any sharp object that may have remained inside or on the body. And then based on the appearances of the wounds, it is most consistent with the knife being used. And that is all that I can say.
I have no further questions for you. Thank you.
May I please report? Dr. Rose, when did you start? You testified you started in August of 2021.
Correct.
Do you remember what day in August of 2021?
I do not.
Okay, that's okay. You conducted this autopsy on October the 14th of 2021?
That is correct.
So at the time you conducted this autopsy, you had been on the job just about 2 months, right?
Correct.
Yeah. You were asked about toxicology. Do you remember that?
Yes.
And isn't it true that the toxicology showed that Christina Parcel had amphetamine in her system? Isn't that true?
Correct.
And isn't that a controlled substance?
Yes, it's a stimulant, yes.
Yeah. Isn't it true? You talked about the sharp force injuries that you discovered during the autopsy, and isn't it true you talked about incised injuries versus stab wounds, right?
Yes.
And isn't it true that in your report you used the word superficial or the adjective superficial prior to many of the times you referenced incised injuries? Isn't that true?
Yes.
All right. And you testified that these incised injuries were much longer than they are deeper. Is that
Yes.
correct? And in fact, in your autopsy report, isn't it true that you didn't even calculate whatever the depth was of the incised injuries?
I mean, it's very difficult because they are so superficial.
Superficial.
Yes.
Right. And isn't it true that the vast majority of the what you call the sharp force injuries you discovered were incised wounds? Isn't that true?
That is true.
And in other words, those are superficial injuries, according to your own words. Isn't that true?
Yes.
Isn't it true that you calculated that Christina Parcel weighed 163 pounds? Is that right?
I believe that is correct, yes.
And she was wearing acrylic fingernails. Is that right?
That is correct.
What color were they? Red?
Let me double check. Yes, they were red. Correct.
One second. Thank you, Dr. Rose. None further.
Can you redirect?
Yes, Your Honor, briefly. Dr. Rose, speaking specifically to the amphetamines that Mr. Mormon brought up, were the amphetamine findings in the toxicology consistent with a prescribed amount?
Yes.
And amphetamines, is that the active chemical in, say, Adderall?
Yes.
And he spoke a lot as to the incised wounds and stab wounds found on Ms. Parcel. Just as to the right side of her neck, how many stab wounds were there?
There were 6 stab wounds to the right side of the neck.
Thank you, Dr. Rose. I have nothing further for you.
Just briefly, and Dr. Rose, he asked you about the quantities being consistent with prescriptions. Isn't it also true that it's possible to get illicit drugs in the same quantities as prescription drugs? Isn't that true?
Sure.
Okay. Nothing else.
Nothing to say.
Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you.
Let's take that.